Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, it's the return of the movie!
Hello, everyone, and welcome to The Return of the Movie, the podcast about sequels, reboots, and franchises. I'm Ben, and I'm here with my co-host, Alex. Oh, wow, I guessed the right side of the screen. And, yeah, this is a this is a special episode of The Return of the Movie. This is not a start of season 2. Instead, we have come back from our hiatus to talk about, well, Scream. So, Alex, what are we dealing with this time?
We're dealing with Scream, or Scream 5, if you want to keep a count. It's a a Re-Quil of one of Hollywood's most lauded horror franchises. Bringing it all back home in almost literally every sense, we're introduced to a new band of characters, as well as our legacy actors, who must come together to stop Ghostface again. With nary a parent in sight, these teenagers will face a brutal murderer while also juggling the ups and downs of meta commentary. And while they mention other franchises whose mega fans spiral out of control and pretty much ruin it for the rest of us, they clearly mean Star Wars, because some of you guys really suck. There's death, there's gore, and there's a scene where two people go to the basement because they're all out of beers upstairs, and they return with literally 2 beers. I don't know about you, but I don't think I would risk my life for anything less than a 6-pack. Just saying.
That was one of my moments in the show where I'm just like, all right, that person's either definitely the killer, or this was just who was in charge of this entire sequence. Who made this happen?
Marie Kondo's all of the beer, like takes it out of the box and just places them in. Like, who takes the time to take the beer out of the box and place it into the fridge? Because again, it's in the basement, so you have to transport it back upstairs.
That's not a. There were a couple things wrong with that. Anyway, Matt's not here for those that are familiar with the show as a whole, so I'm gonna real quick I'm gonna do his job and read all of the cast. So, of course, we have Nev Campbell coming back as Sidney Prescott, David Arquette coming back as Dewey, Courtney Cox as Gail Weathers, obviously, and then there's newcomers Melissa Barrera. I'm sorry. I'm not Matt. I usually don't do this job. We have Jack Quad as Rich Crystal. Oh wait, Melissa is Sam Carpenter, who is the main character. Mikey Madison as Amber Freeman. Jenna Ortega as Tara Carpenter. Dylan Minette as Wes Hicks. Yeah. Jasmine Savvy Brown as Midney Meeks Martin, Mason Gooding as Chad Meeks Martin, Sonia Amar as Liv McKenzie, Marley Shelton as Deputy Judy Hicks, Skeet Ulrich as Billy Looms, that's a fun name, and Roger Jackson as the voice of Ghostface. It was also directed by Matt.
So many hyphenated names in this list. I'm so sorry.
It's fun because I'm the dyslexic person of the group, and the person who usually does all the reads.
And you didn't put any of it in Comic Sans. You should have put it in Comic Sans.
No, I didn't. I dropped the ball on my own accommodations to make my life easy. It was also directed by Tyler Gillett and writers James Vandelbert and Guy Busick, I believe. So now that I am done butchering those names on the behalf of our other panelist, Matt. Hi, Matt. I hope you're listening to this. I have other thing. Instead of Matt's fun fact, it's Ben's fun fact. And that is David Arquette taught the cast how to paint. It was
it's so fun. Cute.
I know. It's also like it's David Arquette and it's Dewey, which are like, and they're the cutest part of the whole Scream franchise. So yes, I love it for that. According to Screen Rant, in an interview with Collider.com, David Arquette shared that he's a Bob Ross instructor, and he just decided that he wanted to teach the cast how to paint. And that was like the big bonding thing that he did with all of those teenage looking kids, who most of which are in their 20s, but still, it was a nice little touch.
Also, I didn't know you could get, like, certified to be a Bob Ross instructor.
I didn't know about that until I, like, found this fun fact, and I'm just like, I'm just gonna say that, and we're just not gonna question it, because that is literally what I'm quoting from another article. It's what do you think the process is to become a Bob Ross instructor, in all honesty?
I mean, I think first, like, a lot of meditation. You just have to become one with yourself and a very calm person, just to begin with. You got to get into that Bob Ross mentality.
I could see David Arquette / Dewey being able to get into that zone. And
yeah, I mean, it makes sense. It checks out.
Yeah, it totally lines up with him. Love every second of it. I will say, like, one of the things that I do find just incredibly interesting about the whole thing, and I forgot to put this in my notes, is like how well this time they actually integrated the OG cast with the main cast, very much unlike what happened in this movie's predecessor, Scream 4, which was also trying to cover the reboots that were happening in horror at the time. There was something very natural where, like, it actually felt like this group of teenagers were actually able to shine as the roles, and, like, overall the cast actually just felt really good, especially for a bunch of new faces to the franchise. Yeah,
I mean, I'd say my biggest thing for this movie is a lot of really great acting, and people who just really got it, like, I want to say especially Mikey Madison, who plays Amber. Mwah. I think she did a great job. She was amazing at the end. She nailed it. I loved her, but really everybody did a great job. And they did a great job of everybody. Most of the teenagers pretty much looked like teenagers, and acted like teenagers, which I think is something that all of the previous movies have definitely tried to do. It's not like a Grease situation where, like, 30-something-year-olds are playing teenagers, and you're like, you look like you have a mortgage. Like, what's going on?
I mean, yeah, Jenna Ortega, the actress who played Tara Carpenter, I know that she's, at least right now, 20. I'm not 100%. She may have been around 18 when this was filmed.
Yeah.
But she is it's one of the few times where it's like they casted someone who's supposed to be a teenager, and the actress looks like they are just straight up a 16-year-old in high school. Yeah, like, because Drew Barrymore did not look like a teenager when she did Scream. Like, she just looked like an adult woman. But yeah, Jenna Ortega definitely looked like a teenager, and I think they definitely captured, like, that aspect of it for sure. Yeah, which I will say, like, this franchise actually, one of the most fascinating things about this franchise for me is that, like, as we've done this podcast, I think one of the main reasons why we even came back to do this was because we had so much fun covering Scream the first time. But also, like, it holds up incredibly well as an actual piece of media commentary. One of the things that I found really fascinating about Sam as a character kind of stepping back into this was Scream 4. If you weren't here for that podcast, they tried doing a thing where the person who was supposed to be the main character was related to Sydney, but Sydney was in the movie the entire time. And also, this person turned out to be the killer by the end, and was essentially just trying to write her own movie. Where Sam, as a character, with her general ties to Billy, who was the villain back in the original, and the way that it sort of manifests, I feel like she's actually probably the only example of, like, a psychologically interesting main character that they've done. they did try to do something very similar to the whole dead flashbacks thing in Scream 3, but this is the only one where it actually felt A, or organic, and B, had consequence to the film.
Yeah, I mean, I think, first of all, they did a really good job of, like, de-aging and making Billy Loomis look like Billy Loomis. I liked how he looked in all of her, like, flashbacks. Or not flashbacks, her, like, hallucinations, sort of. And it also kind of lent, you know, that first time that she gets attacked in the hospital, there is something in your mind, like, was she really? Or is that her hallucination? It's interesting that they didn't explore that a little bit more, that she's, like, imagining it, especially since the killers know that she has this issue. So I think they could have played with that a little bit more and tried to, like, turn people more against her. But overall, I thought it was, like, a really interesting plot point of someone who's dealing with that.
I think one of the main things with this movie is there are a lot of strong suits here, but the script overall is where the majority of the problems certainly are. And I had the same thing where, first time watching this, I was having the same thing where when she first gets attacked in the hospital, I'm kind of wondering, like, how many of these attacks are going to be real versus a figment of her imagination. Mm-hmm. And the fact that wasn't played into at all, I found really disappointing by the end. I was fully expecting us to be going, like, full into just, like, madness and not being able to question it. The idea of the unreliable main character is something I was really excited for, that I feel like we lost out on big time. Is what I'm trying to articulate.
It's funny because I just read the book My Heart is a Chainsaw, and that deals with, like, a female main character who's a teenager, and she's kind of like an unreliable narrator who's also struggling with mental illness. So it's kind of funny that I just read that. But yeah, the script needed work. There's so many great ideas, but it's just felt a little sloppy. Some of the like the legacy actors coming back, it was like, okay, let's, like, I don't need this much exposition. I don't think there's I don't know. It's how many people are going to see this movie who have never seen Scream? I guess that's who they're putting it in for, but it did feel like the parts where they're, like, talking to each other and just, like, shoving exposition and, like, catching everyone up just really slowed down the pace of the movie.
The whole I'd imagine the section that you're talking about is after we're reintroduced to Dewey from the perspective of the main characters. And by the way, Dewey's reintroduction is done incredibly well.
Very good. Very good. Like, that's a part of the script that really, really shines. It seamlessly, like, adds exposition, calls back to previous films, but adds a lot to this current film and is brought back later in the movie. So I thought that was, like, excellent. So there are parts of the script that are really good. Yeah, but then it's like him and Gail catching up is like, okay.
Yeah.
And it's, I don't know. The film has so much, it's, like, so sardonic at points, and it has a lot of meta commentary. So I feel like sometimes the sincere moments feel cheesy next to that, and especially when they're, like, long.
So I think we've talked about this. The first time I ever watched the original Scream film, I thought it was a comedy. And that's because of the sheer amount of meta commentary that's in there. And the jokes are funny in the original. This is way less on the humor is nowhere near as good as it is in the original. However, the meta commentary is very spot on, sometimes a little bit too spot on in a not good way for the script. But it is, and we were talking about this right beforehand, even Scream 4, which is, in my opinion, one of the weaker films, still nails its meta commentary. But, like, this one is, in previous films, they'll at least use the meta commentary to acknowledge pieces that are going to be in plot holes, which they don't really do in this one. In Scream 4, there's the entire town's on lockdown because this shit has happened so many times in this town. And then in this one, you don't see any adults, you don't see any teachers, there's no curfew, the police are just bumbling fucking idiots, which is genuinely shocking considering how
This girl
much
is
shit
murdered.
has happened.
This girl's, or not murdered, this girl is almost murdered, and her mom just can't get back from that conference in London. Like,
I know.
What? For
so
the whole
pardon me.
movie! We never see her! We never see anyone's parents. They never explain why Amber's parents aren't at her house. The only parent we see are the twins' mom, who is Randy's sister, and has been in previous films. But we never see teachers, even when they're at school. And I feel like a big thing, you would think this is like, the fifth movie, the fifth time that this scenario has happened. I would think immediately, everyone's home. You're not leaving your house. You're not going to have a wake party. Oh yeah, I'll let my teenagers just go to some party at night while a fifth murderer is on the loose. That to me was like, okay, like that's a little dumb. That it's not even addressed.
Yeah, if there's anything the slasher movie genre as a whole has just never been able to do right, it is deal with all of these loose ends. That is, what the fuck are the parents going to do? Because they're not going to let that happen. And I feel like one of the things with Scream is that it started out very smart, but now it feels like, well, there's two things. It feels like for the sake of being able to tell their story, they're going to just do whatever the fuck they want and damn real world consequences. The other thing is that this cast was already pretty massive, that adding extra elements of like parents and teachers would have been a lot of trouble. Now, do I think that if there's anything that in general the off-screen parents should have never allowed, the fucking wake party? Yes.
Yeah. I just like not a single adult in this town thought, no, you're not doing that. It's also just like, it seems like all the adults in this town just suck. Like Sydney's mom kind of sucked. Sounds like all these parents don't give a shit about their kids. Tara and Sam's mom sucks. Her dad sucks. Like, is there something in the water that just makes you go like lose some sort of like frontal lobe ability for, I don't know, compassion towards your own children? That should maybe be a part of the next movie. Like, why do all the adults in this town just simply not care about children?
That is, I wish that is something that would at least be addressed. There are, and I will say, there are slashers or slasher-esque films that do a great job at dealing with this. For anyone who, oh wow, I nearly called it the Halloween trilogy. It on Netflix that I'm totally blanking out on. Fear Street, excuse me. Like Fear Street, which is, it has a very supernatural element. However, it is still slasher based, does manage to cover all of these sort of little plot holes of what are the parents doing very well, to the point where you don't question it too much. It's very much these kids are doing their own shit, or they're at summer camp, or like literally every possible thing is going against them, and it works well in that kind of setting. But like, even if we're talking about the Halloween movies, which we covered just this last Halloween, like I'm really hard pressed to find a slasher that doesn't have these problems.
Yeah, I guess in the original Halloween, it all happens in like within a couple hours of each other, pretty much.
Yeah.
So it has that excuse, but yeah, it was just, there's also like another little thing. When they're leaving the hospital, Sam is like, and the boyfriend, they're wheeling her little sister down, and Sydney and Gail start talking to her about like, this is what's going to happen to you. And she gets upset, and the boyfriend's like, I'm going to bring the car around. And then Sam storms out of the lobby of the hotel because of what they're saying to her, leaving her sister in the lobby. And then she gets in the car and her sister's in the car. And I was like, when did her sister get into the car? I was like, how did her sister get into the car?
That's I'm hoping that it's just like a shot got cut from the sequence on that, because otherwise,
to me that was just like
not great.
It was very glaring to me. I was like, well, that's a weird little thing for them to edit out.
One of the things that I did find a little bit interesting is I'm like so tempted. I guess everything else, I know that we have things broken down and we want to talk about the violence in this, which is, I feel like this film was pretty violent, but one of the core elements of this, like any other Scream movie, is the meta commentary, and how well it is actually reflected in the script, which in my opinion is the strong suit of this movie, is that it feels like a Scream movie. There's nothing that feels detracted. And even though like we're poking a lot of like holes in like the general world of things, the actual plot itself and how it mirrors other sorts of reboots works really well. So we bring back the original cast, and namely we have the big three, which are Dewey, Gail, and Sydney. So those are our three primary cast members from all of the previous movies. So, of course, the second that they introduce Dewey, if you just have seen any reboots that are like this, and the biggest example is obviously Star Wars and that sequel trilogy, you know that Dewey is like pretty much marked for death instantly. It's you see him, he's at an all-time low. He's been distant from his partner, who last we saw he was still very much in a relationship with. And it is literally the same exact thing that happens to Han Solo in the sequel Star Wars trilogy. Like that description is just what that is. And then, of course, he goes off alone to finish off Ghostface and gets distracted by a loved one and then gets violently murdered.
That was, so brutal. I mean, it's the saddest one. It's like when Randy died. It's so upsetting.
I know.
But I think they did a good job in that it was like that was going to be the only thing that got Sydney to come back to the town. I don't think she would have come back otherwise.
Yeah.
So I think
they made it.
That was like, it was like necessary. I did love that. Like, he's like, oh, it was an honor to kill you.
Yeah.
Like,
no,
damn.
It was the whole thing. And that's like the thing that works really well about Scream, is that sort of meta commentary. So the thing that is mainly brought up is the idea of nostalgia sequels, or as the movie calls them, Re-Quils, which I think most people can agree is not a name that I have heard anyone actually use. No. I feel like this movie is trying to make Re-Quils a thing, and we're not gonna make it a thing. At least
it feels like a joke. It feels like a joke. Like she is too far down the Reddit hole, and she's like, "Yeah, that's what they all call it on there." And people are like, "No, no one calls it that."
No, we're not gonna do that. But I do think that that's one of the interesting elements of this, and there's a couple of the main things that it's also commentating on is the advent of it. Essentially, the most important thing for the Re-Quil is that you are introducing a new cast while still having some of the legacy members in it, and sort of lightly sprinkling them in and lightly repeating the plot of the original, essentially doing exactly what Star Wars did and remaking the original just with a slightly different take.
Yeah.
And interestingly enough, I'm not 100% sure that is what happened here. Because ultimately, there is a lot of repeat beat by beat that they let you know of. And there's a couple elements that are definitely borrowed from the original and mirror it really well, but it's not as heinous as the remake of A New Hope versus The Force Awakens.
There we go. Yeah.
That's what was in my head. When I was watching this, I still felt like I didn't quite know where things were going to turn. And to me, that felt really good.
Yeah, there was, I mean, it's, I think they did a good job of having these like almost, I mean, the scene in the living room where she's watching Stab, which is the remake in that universe, like the movie version of the true events. And she's in the exact living room that real event actually took place, and she's watching the scene and is like, turn around, and Ghostface comes up behind her. I mean, it's just, how can you not like that? It's so funny and over the top, but like in a good way where it's hilarious and also like, oh, she's about to get stabbed.
Yeah, no, I thought that it was a very like well working piece. There was, and then this kind of thing is repeated throughout the entire movie to very good effect, where even the way that some of the kills happen and the way that the ways that people survive the party feel very similar, and like it kind of gives you the idea of like, oh, if they make it out of this is the new cast if they were to hypothetically do a trilogy after this, which I was looking into this. There's no solid proof that is what is going to happen. And interestingly enough, I feel like this movie kind of proved to me, at least, that Scream does actually have a place within the just essentially movie landscape as a whole, as a franchise, where I don't think Scream should be brought back to necessarily exist as a franchise, but it should be brought back in to make commentary on the current state of horror films, which this does extremely well.
I don't know how many more movies we would get with, like Neve Campbell and Courtney Cox coming back. To me, it felt like this was the last time that they were doing this. And we watched the TV shows to our chagrin. Yeah. There was some great stuff in there. I think they can. I mean, they live in a universe where these events were turned into a movie. So I think at some point they probably will do spin-off where Sydney and Gail and the original actors just aren't in it. Or maybe like one of them is, or they're called back to. It would be interesting. I mean, do people go and see this movie because they know Neve Campbell is going to be in it? Or do they go and see this movie because they just enjoy the Scream franchise so much?
So I think that's actually one of the interesting things about the state of this property, though, is that the biggest issue, and this movie even calls it out, is that the biggest issue is that there's never a killer to come back every time, so they have to invent a new killer essentially every single movie.
Which I do kind of enjoy because it's like, I love that there's just a never-ending, there's always going to be some new reason for somebody to kill, because even though in the first one, I feel like Billy Loomis and Stu have this, what's in their mind, such a well thought out, constructed reason why they do it. It really just makes me think like, man, men have nothing but the fucking audacity. And that just continues on. Like, these people just have the audacity that they think they can murder other people because of this like selfish, greedy reason that they've concocted in their head. And that's reality. Like, that's true. And that's never going to go away. So they do have like a limitless amount of things that they can draw from.
Oh, yeah. No, that's one of the things that I think it makes this work so well is that even going, because to me, the core of this franchise is, again, always going to be the media commentary. And every movie, the killer has a reason that is tied to essentially a media commentary. And there's always this big, there's always this big expose at the end where the killer is explaining their motives. And it has something to do with the state of horror and the state of gaining fame. And as, again, just in general media commentary. And that's one of the things that, for me, as someone that likes media commentary, I love. So there's always this different sort of way that they could be commentating on society and media as a whole with their killers. And this one, I actually think misses the mark very heavily, but it still works. Their motives still check out. However, it's this hand-fisted monologue at the end about toxic fandom. And again, it's very obvious that they're talking about Star Wars when this happens. But one of the things that for me always just kind of stuck out is that this movie did so well without telling us with that it didn't need the monologue at the end. Like, you know what it's about. You understand that whoever the killer is halfway through is motivated by wanting to see their franchise represent specifically what they think it should be. And to me, that's one of the things that works really well. But in actuality, though, I feel like Scream has almost always been about sort of toxic fandom and toxic media consumption.
Absolutely. And it's funny because even the name is a joke because I call it Scream, even though all the other ones have had the number in it. And that is absolutely, it has to be a reference to like the recent remake of Halloween. And then we have Texas Chainsaw Massacre coming out in like next month. And then they're doing a remake of The Exorcist. So I think it's funny that I feel like even the name of the movie is a commentary in some way.
Yeah. And that's, again, that's the reason why, like, we, because we were so like, oh yeah, we're going to hang on to this podcast until we're in season 2 mode. And then we saw that this was coming out and we're like, we have to fucking cover it. We're not allowed to not cover this for this exact reason. And it is, it's weird though, because normally like we have to spend a lot of time dissecting these things. And this movie very clearly states everything, and it's all very cleanly done. One of the things that I really liked that it touched on without going too deep into because of the identity crisis that would cause was elevated horror and how that has changed the horror genre as a whole. There's several just scenes that discuss this for the sake of having the discussion, not for the sake of moving the plot along. But it feels like it belongs in the movie because we're watching Scream and we expect media commentary.
Yeah. I mean, it's hard for me to think of a horror movie that's come out recently that is just like a true sort of slasher that's not a reboot or a remake of a previous franchise.
That's exactly
what I mean?
And well, one of the things that I actually did find kind of interesting is that, technically speaking, Scream kind of actually fits the bill of elevated horror. And the fact that it's not just people being stabbed, it is always talking about a larger thematic subject. Oh my God, we have a dog in Alexandra's camera. If you are not on the video podcast, which I believe will be coming out after this releases on audio, please come by just for this. We'll mark it in the timestamps.
This is Paco.
Oh my gosh.
Hang out, I guess. Yeah, I mean, and it's funny too because, obviously we've gotten a front row seat to the past decade of like this like horror revamp where you're seeing horror movies. I mean, how many people think Toni Collette should have been like nominated for awards for Hereditary? She did a phenomenal job. So Yeah, it's almost like it's a commentary, and it's also like a don't forget about us.
Yeah, I think one of my favorite things about this whole thing is that they give credit. Like, the characters in this movie that are talking about this, that are supposed to be the voice of the writers, are like, these movies are amazing. It is not what Scream/Stab is, though.
Yeah.
Like, that is very explicitly stated, and there's something...
It's also this, like, commentary on Gen Z this, like, oh, we're so, like, like, people who think they're so refined and have just, like, an elevated... It's like, okay, calm down. You're not the first person to ever think this, or the first person to, like, have a thought, really. So I liked the commentary on that. It's... You gotta pick a place, bud. All right, there we go.
This is a franchise that, like, will always have a near dear place to us, and I'm so sad that Matt wasn't able to be part of this conversation.
Would have loved it.
Anyone that's just listening, yeah, he's one of our other normal hosts and panelists on this, and he is the horror junkie of the group, and also the, like, big Scream fan, and the reason why I actually like slashers now.
Yeah.
So it's this movie, as good as it is on the media commentary, it does have a couple weaknesses. So I am wondering, Alex, what's your verdict on this? How do you feel about this overall?
Overall, I think it's a worthy addition to the franchise. I definitely think you'll like it if you like the other Scream movies. It's a fun time. It's incredibly violent. I don't know if it's just because I haven't watched the other ones since we did the podcast, but it just felt like every time someone got stabbed, they were like, let's do it a dozen times for good measure. I also loved the addition of guns. There's something that seems so weird and, like, Terminator-y to me when they go from knives to guns. Something about that cracks me up. I don't know why. Like, I thought that was funny. I also, it just makes so much commentary. Like, there's a scene in a kitchen where there's so many opening of doors, and to the point where you're thinking they're trying to build tension because someone's going to pop up, and it never happens, which is so funny. Instead, Ghostface just pops out from behind a bush. Just, like...
Yeah.
For as many flaws as the script maybe has, overall, I think it's a really fun time, and I would definitely recommend it.
Wholeheartedly. We didn't even get to... That's, like, the just pinnacle scene for me of just watching, and they do that, like, they don't do it once. That's just it turns into a running gag that is not explicitly a gag throughout the film. Anytime there's a fridge door or just anything that could obfuscate. Also, like, in the opening sequence, there's plenty of moments where they're just like, we're just going to put this hallway in the left third, and you're going to expect something to be there, and it's never going to happen.
It literally never... I don't think it happens once in the movie, but there has to be at least 7 times where somebody opens a door or fridge or whatever and closes it, and there's nothing behind it, which is hysterical.
The one time that they do a jump scare, it is from the POV of a person who turns out to be an actual killer, and we fully just get the shit scared out of us by one of the twins, who is actually just the biggest cinema nerd and a total non-threat the entire time. Also, just, again, as my verdict, I will say the script flaws that were there were noticeable. However, the movie says it itself that, like, with the slasher genre, you're not there for smart, you're just there for people getting stabbed. And that is kind of what ends up happening. And of course, if you're watching Scream and you're like me, you're here for people getting stabbed and for a conversation about the state of horror. And it just does this so well, down to the point where I don't think that this movie would be a good fit for you if you were not a fan of the original franchise. And the reason for that is it does the Re-Quil thing so damn well that as a fan of the original franchise, you will really like this movie. So
yeah, I don't think you would get this movie or even kind of enjoy it as much as you should if you haven't seen at least the first one, if not almost, I'd say 1 and 2 at least.
exactly. Yeah, I think that this is definitely worth it, and I will say you could definitely skip 3 and maybe 4 if you are thinking about doing a full watch. But other than that, like, this is it. This was actually I think that it said its piece very well. It had something new to say about the state of horror, and it nailed it. So it may not be the smartest written plot that you've ever had, but it does its job being Scream. So on
Agreed.
that, everyone, thank you for listening. If you enjoyed the return of the movie, please subscribe on your streaming platform of choice and leave us a review so, more people can find the show and all of our media commentary. Also, if you're not subscribed on our YouTube, you need to fix that at youtube.com/Scope Productions or click on the link in the show notes. YouTube is our home for all of our content, including Too Fast, Too Movie, and Full Stop Review, which is a bite-sized review show, and also Die Time, which is our Call of Cthulhu actual play live stream where we sometimes spoof known properties like Halloween or even Cowboy Bebop. We are currently also trying to get our channel to 500 subscribers, and we are really close. So if you come by, click that subscription box and bell, we will absolutely get there in no time, and it would be a lot to us. Well, I think that's it for everything else, and we will see you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Oh my gosh, that pupper. Oh my gosh.
Say bye.
This episode of The Return of the Movie was produced by Benjamin Collins with music and editing also by Benjamin Collins. The Return of the Movie is produced by ABBC Productions and released under the Scope Network. You can find more of our content at youtube.com/Scope Productions.